Thanks very much for coming to this AshEcon webinar. This is on the rookie Ph.D. job market for health economists in particular. So a lot of what we're going to talk about applies to people in any subfield of economics, but to some extent this is adapted to talk about things of interest to health economists in particular. So thinking about the big picture, certainly like if you're thinking about going on the job market for the first time this fall, winter, I'm certain that you're you're somewhat stressed out, right? And so the first thing I just want to say is that's totally. I just want to legitimize that and say that that makes sense. It's understandable. That's how everybody feels. I know that this year in particular has special challenges, but just don't feel like you're going through this alone. Everybody's been through it. Everybody in your cohort is going through it too. Try and channel that energy, that adrenaline in healthful ways, right? Like try and channel that energy so that you can get things done, that you're motivated, but really try to avoid that energy becoming destructive. Really try to protect your health. Try and exercise, try and get sunlight, get enough sleep. Um, Make sure too that you stay in touch with your families. Make an effort, go out of your way to talk to friends who are outside of academia who will not be talking about the job market with you. And then for the people who are in the job market with you, these people are really not your competitors. These are people going through something at the same time as you. You will be seeing the other health economists on the market at the same time again and again throughout your career. So try and be friendly with them, share information. Don't see them as competitors. Um, just in the same way that you wouldn't see a friend who's getting married, you wouldn't be angry at them that they took a partner that you could have had, right? That'd be an insane person thinking that way. So likewise, there's just so many different jobs out there. Everybody's looking for something different. Don't see other job market people as competitors, but as people that can relate to what you're going through. Share information with them and commiserate. Okay, so thinking about like what the big picture objective is here. um, in an academic job search, what you're looking for is not to like impress your parents. It's not to make your advisor happy. It's not to get a job in a quote unquote top X department. What your goal really should be is to find a good match, right? So again, think of it like a marriage. There's no one man that's the right husband for everybody. There's no one woman that's the right wife for everybody, right? Who is the perfect person for you depends on you and your characteristics. Everybody's is different. So the same thing is true of the jobs. Um, so what your goal is to find a job that's a good match for your interests, your constraints, your preferences, and so on. So how can you increase the chances of finding a good match? Well, you have to know who you are. So you have to figure out, like, where do I fit within health economics? Like, am I a healthcare IO person who's studying hospital mergers? Am I a health behaviors person who's studying addiction? Am I an insurance person who's studying uncertainty and risk? Am I more theoretical? Am I structural empirical? Am I reduced form empirical? Do I like teaching or not? Do I like writing grants or not? um, how much do I like giving public presentations? Like all the answers to all of these questions help shape what is the right job for you. So try and figure out the answers to these things, like what subfields of health economics are you going to work in? What methods are you going to use in your research? What are your comparative advantages? Um, and once you know those things, share those things with other people. So tell your advisor, like, for example, I've decided I really want to teach in a liberal arts institution, or I really don't like teaching at all. I think I want to work in a soft money environment where I can write grants and really never teach. All of these are these are great. All of them are great jobs. So don't ever feel like, oh, I can't admit to my advisor what I really want. For you to get what you want, you have to tell your advisors, because they're the ones who are going to be an intermediary for you to some extent, writing letters, advocating for you. And it's really important that they know who you are and what you're looking for. So you have to be honest with your advisors, be honest with yourself, and be honest with the employers that you talk to. So just to give you some like evidence that everybody's own best match is different, here's some neat data that was collected by Brooke Helpy McFall. And what she did is she surveyed people who were going on the econ job market 2007 to 2010 and just asked them, which of these different types of jobs do you think you want? So this is before the market even starts, but there are people who are about to go on the market. So 71.9% said they wanted to be an assistant professor at a university. 8.1% said they wanted to work at a liberal arts college. 11.1% said nonprofit, government, or quasi-governmental organization. 6.8% said business or industry, and 2% said be a postdoc for 2 years. So even before the market starts, right, sort of people already have different interests. And then within each of these categories, there's lots of different possibilities as well. So in thinking about economics and the market for us, right, the market for economists, obviously it's kind of natural to think about supply and demand. So what's the supply of us? Well, the supply of new PhD economists in the United States in 2018, which is the most recent data for which I found data, is 1,247. So that many people got PhDs in economics at US institutions. What's the demand for PhD economists? So this is what's the number of new jobs that were listed in JOE. JOE is the job openings for economists that's run by the AEA. It's where virtually all employers interested in hiring a PhD economist would put that listing or ad. So during that same year, 2018, over 4,000 new jobs were listed, over 3,000 new academic jobs, and roughly 1,000 new non-academic jobs. So that's a gigantic number, right? So the supply is there's 1,247 new PhDs entering the market, but there's demand for over 4,000. Right, so we are in a very enviable position. I want to congratulate all of you on choosing the correct discipline in which to get your PhD. This is not true for most disciplines. Like in the humanities, it's a bleak situation indeed on the job market. There are more than 3 times as many new jobs listed as there are PhDs coming out from US institutions. But just to temper that a little bit, that 4,000 number does include some listings for senior position or any rank positions. So you're not just competing against, other new assistant professors, but also against, potentially full professors. And to some extent, people trained getting their PhDs elsewhere in the world are applying for these jobs too. But at the same time, some people getting their PhDs in the US are going abroad and they're not going to jobs listed in JOE. So in brief, like we're in a great situation here as economists. So you're probably thinking like, well, that's great for 2018, but what the heck's going to happen this year with COVID? And so we don't know yet, right? But here's what we do know. And so this is coming from the AEA, American Economic Association, formed an ad hoc committee on the job market. I'm chairing that committee. And so what we found is that year to date, as of the end of July, the number of jobs listed in JOE, it's down about 25% compared to recent years, where recent years is 2017 to 2019. So it looks like it's down about a quarter so far. But what really matters, though, is what happens in the fall. Like there's generally not that many jobs listed in the summer, for example. So another analogy would be, well, what happened during the financial crisis? That also led to tremendous macroeconomic devastation. It led to a real shock in the market for economists. So when you go back and you look at what happened in terms of the number of jobs listed in JOE, the financial crisis resulted in one bad year. That was 2009. And in that year, the number of jobs in JOE were down 20.7% from the year before. After that, there were 2 sort of slightly down years, down about 3% each in 2010 and 2011. And then by 2012, it had totally rebounded. The number of jobs listed was actually a little higher than it had been in 2008. So we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with COVID. It's not good, right? You know that. If it's like the financial crisis, the number of jobs will be down 20%. Right now, we're seeing down 25%. Who knows what else might happen, but this is sort of what we know at this point. Please do feel free to enter any questions you might have in the Q&A box. I'll stop a few times during the presentation to answer questions, and then there'll definitely be time at the end of the presentation as well to answer any questions you might have. But if you can see the link, these slides will be available on the AshEcon website. There's a little hyperlink, it's almost invisible there, at the bottom of the slide. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the memos, the communications written by our AEA Committee on the Job Market, so you can stay up to date on everything that we're learning and sharing. So one really key question for all of you is, should you go on the job market this year? The most important person for you to talk to about this is your dissertation advisor, the chair of your dissertation committee, because their letter and their opinion of you has the biggest impact on your outcomes. If your advisor is telling you do not go on the market, you don't want to force it and go on, because like their letter is key. If their letter says this person isn't ready, it's not going to go well. So talk to your advisor, talk to the rest of your committee. Their opinions matter the most. Without me knowing anything about you, like here's kind of my general take on it. is if you are currently entering your fourth year or something earlier than the fourth year, do not don't go on the market. Sit this out, get more research done, improve your job market paper, publish papers. All of that will help you. It's uncommon for people to go on the market in their fourth year or earlier anyway. And so if this is going to be a tough year, there's no reason to go out in the market sort of aggressively. If you're a fifth year, then I'd say it's most ambiguous. Here it really depends on what your advisor's opinion is. If your advisor says, look, your job market paper is fantastic, you are going to get a job no matter what, this is going to be great, then go out in your fifth year. If your advisor says like, your paper's really not ready, you should probably sit it out. If you are entering your sixth year or something higher, like seventh or eighth year, my opinion is, again, I don't know all the details, you should talk to your advisor, but my opinion is you should go on the market. And the reason is that, even if the number of jobs in Joe falls by 50%, which is like more than twice what happened during the financial crisis, that's still over 2,000 new jobs. And it's still way above the number of people getting a PhD in economics in the US in any given year. So there's tons of jobs out there. It won't be as many as a usual year, but there will be a lot. What if it means you don't get the job you would have gotten had you gone out 2 years ago? Well, your first job isn't your last job. There is a very active market for assistant professors to move laterally, to move up. There's a lot of changes in sectors. People who go to the Fed go to academia. People who start in academia go into consulting. It goes in all directions. This isn't the last time you'll be on the market probably. So don't worry about getting the perfect job this year. If you're a very advanced graduate student, just get some job that's a decent match, and then you can always make tweaks later. And I really do think, like, worst case, if you don't get a job this year, no one's going to judge you. Like, in a typical year, if you didn't get any job at all, people would think like, that's kind of odd because we know the market for economists is really strong. No one is going to judge you in a year like this because of COVID. Let me just check out the Q&A box here. Okay, if there's really 3 times more jobs, then is the majority of jobs not filled each year? There are definitely a lot of jobs that go unfilled each year. Once you are on the other side of the job market and you are doing university recruiting, you will be very disappointed by how often you conduct a search for a new assistant professor and do not end up hiring anybody because you bring in great people, but they take other offers. It does happen. It says it looks like Joe is down 70% or more. That's not true. Year to date, it's down about 25%. Over the summer, it's down about half, but over the summer, there are very few jobs listed. What if you're in your fourth year but won't get an extension? Yeah, so that's true. I don't know all the details of your funding, and if you're not going to be able to get any funding to continue to be a grad student, then your hand is forced. I think you kind of have to go out. Advice for individuals applying for teaching jobs without having taught their own course. I think hopefully then you will have, well, what you then have to do is signal that you're serious about teaching. So did you go to a liberal arts institution yourself and therefore understand the culture in a liberal arts college? Did you TA? And if you did TA, then can you provide really strong TA evaluations that, again, make it credible that you're going to be a good teacher? Another thing you'd be expected to do is when, typically what you do is on a campus visit, you might be asked to teach a class. And so they might say, hey, we're going to drop you into applied micro, and it's the day we're talking about price elasticities. So come prepared with a lecture to talk about price elasticities. Or they might tell you, look, you're in labor, pick any topic in labor and come lecture in our advanced labor economics course. Another thing you can do is just have very detailed plans for how you would teach their particular students. Like, these are all ways that you can just demonstrate, I'm really serious about teaching, and I'd be a good match for what you're looking for. Another question is, does a person with a PhD in HS health services research, would they be considered a health economist? Yeah. So there are many sort of econ adjacent PhDs. So PhDs in health policy, PhDs in health services research. I don't even remember anymore what exact PhD people have. I just know if they work in my area. And there's lots of people with PhDs in econ adjacent fields who publish in top econ journals. So it really comes down to the work you do and not, so you would be considered a very close substitute for a health economist. Am I talking just about health economics department jobs? No, I'm talking about all sorts of different jobs, and I'll go into more detail on the differences in just a bit. Okay, there's some questions about deadlines and whatnot, so I'm going to switch back because we will be talking about the timetable. Okay, so there was a question about, am I only talking about econ departments? So no. So the good news is, again, not only are there a ton of jobs, but there are a huge variety of jobs available for economists and health economists. And let me kind of give you a little bit of a summary of the different sectors. So let's just start with academia first. Academia just means like universities and colleges. So one big split there is liberal arts college versus research university. So liberal arts college, typically your job description would be a lot more teaching. You would still have research expectations, but they would not be as high. But the teaching expectations would be much higher. So much higher in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. A liberal arts college is not going to say this person's research is great. Who cares if they can teach? A research university might do that. A liberal arts college will not do that. They will make very, very sure that you're a great communicator, a good mentor, somebody who's going to invest in being great in the classroom. So that's where it would help to have teaching experience, to have TA evaluations that are very strong, and good plans for teaching. For research universities, it's more research and less teaching, but again, the teaching still matters, but research gets greater weight. Within research universities, there's tons of different departments that you as a health economist could be hired. So obviously, econ department. Any part of health economics is potentially relevant, but oftentimes economics departments focus on the health economists whose work is the most structural, theoretical, or methodological. And the reason is that if the research university also has a business school, also has a public policy school, also has a medical school, the economics department might say, well, they'll hire the health economists in other areas. We're going to focus on the ones who have more synergies outside of health econ with other econ fields. And so they'll go more for theory, more for structure, more for methodology. And that's a generalization, but I think it's a valid one. Business schools are especially going to want to hire health economists who do IO, like hospital mergers, pharmaceuticals, R&D, healthcare. So healthcare meaning like the provision of care by the supply of healthcare, in other words. Less emphasis on like demand for health. In public policy institutions, they will be looking more for people doing empirical work, policy relevant topics. And for these other departments, public policy, public health, and medicine, it's incredibly important that you as an economist signal that you can play well with others, with other disciplines. Like we all know, there are people in economics who think economics is the best discipline. It's superior to sociology. It's superior to political science and epidemiology. That's just kind of a little clueless when we're amongst economists. If you express that kind of an opinion in a multidisciplinary group, they're going to be enraged and they're not going to see you as a good colleague. So public policy, public health, and medicine are really looking for economists who are open to collaboration with non-economists and who not only acknowledge that other social sciences are relevant and do good work, but actually want to work with them. So they would expect you, for example, so suppose you are a health economist studying like emergency contraception or abortion. Well, these other types of departments would expect that you would be aware of the work on those topics being done by sociologists and demographers and epidemiologists. So there is kind of a higher bar. Like you need to be familiar with literatures in more disciplines to be appealing to these other units. One other difference between public health and medicine and these other units is that public health and medicine, medicine is almost always soft money. Public health is sometimes soft money. And what I mean by soft money is that there are expectations that you will fund your salary through external grants. So they might say like, we will pay 100% of your salary the first 2 years, but by year 3, we'd like to see you funding a quarter, year 4, 50%, and then year 5 and 6 and thereon, like 90%. You won't do very much teaching, but you will do a lot of grant writing. And so depending on your background, you may find this really appealing or really horrifying, right? If you're used to writing grants, you're familiar, you're not intimidated by that, this is a way you can build a gigantic empire. You not only fund yourself, you hire postdocs, you hire grad students, and you never teach. And all of your time is devoted to research. Like that's nirvana for a lot of people. If you don't like writing grants and prefer teaching, then that's not a good match for you. So as a health economist, you want to know how well would you fit in a soft money department? Are you willing to not teach and write grants with the upside of potentially building a big empire and having all your own time for research? So which type of department you start in does have some implications for what the rest of your career is like. So another way to put it is like there's sort of a path dependence. The longer you stay, the longer you spend the beginning of your career in one type of environment, the more you evolve to be adapted to that environment, and you fit less well in other environments. So for example, if you go to an economics department, what they really value is just publishing in econ journals. And more specifically, what they want to see are top 5, and they want to see top field journals, and then other meaningful field journals. They will not care in an economics department if you publish in JAMA. Now, JAMA is the #1 medical journal in the United States. It's one of the highest impact journals that exists. But in econ, what they value is economics journals. And so if you want to publish a lot in JAMA and New England Journal of Medicine, econ department is not a great match for you. Business schools value all the econ journals plus business journals, which you may or may not be familiar with. So for example, you might be in like the marketing group of a business school. Well, they really value Journal of Marketing. If you're in the management group of a business school, they would value Journal of Management and Strategic Management Journal. And then you would have the flexibility. Do you just want to try and publish an econ, or do you also want to publish to some extent in these business journals? Policy, it's a very broad set of journals that counts. So econ journals, health policy journals like Health Affairs and J. Hipple, Journal of Health Policy, Politics, and Law, and the medical journals like JAMA New England Journal. And then in public health and medicine, what matters most there are the medical journals. So JAMA New England Journal of Medicine. So if you have a job in public health or medicine and you publish in Restat, the dean doesn't care. That's nice. That's one more article. But if you publish in JAMA New England Journal, you know, the dean or the department chair might come down and clap you on the back and tell you you're a great person, and they're really proud of you. So what they really value there are those medical journals, less so the econ journals. Another really important difference is that the way that public health and medicine people do research is a little different. In econ, you might see 1 to 3 co-authors on a paper, sometimes a little more, and the papers are big in econ, right? These are like sort of exhaustive investigations of an area. In public health and medicine, they tend to be shorter papers. Could just be like a 5-page paper in a medical journal, and it might have 10 co-authors, where it's a very interdisciplinary group, like a physician, an epidemiologist, you as a health economist, and you're playing well with others, and you're writing this interdisciplinary piece. And so more people write more articles with more co-authors that are shorter compared to econ. And so obviously, if your first job is in a medical school and you adapt to that environment and produce a lot of papers in JAMA New England Journal with doctors, there's path dependence. You really can't go back to econ and say, hey, I'm a great fit for econ, because they'd say, well, wait, where are the econ journal publications? So I've just talked about academia so far, but there's lots of other options. So there's lots of postdoctoral fellowships. For example, like CEPR at Stanford is a very famous one. Harvard Society of Fellows. NBER has postdocs in aging and health. There are National Institute of Health funded postdocs at all these different population centers across the US. So there's a pop center at like Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, and so on. And for those though, you'd compete not just against other economists, but also sociologists and demographers. If a researcher can get a big enough grant, they can also just hire their own postdoc on an ad hoc basis. So that could be great, or it could be bad for you. It really depends. So it could be great if the person you're working for is working right in your area of interest, and they're a great mentor, and they want to see you succeed, and they're going to write you a great letter of recommendation to become a professor or to get another job. It's a bad situation if the person is not a great match for your interests, because if you're just working for them, they have claim on 40 hours a week of your time. You working on your own stuff has to come on nights and weekends. So make sure that if you do one of these individual postdocs, that you really like the work the person is doing, and that you've asked around and made sure that they're a good advisor. Now, there's also a huge variety of non-academic jobs. In the government, there's the Federal Reserve banks, like the Board of Governors and the Federal Reserve in Washington, plus other ones around the country like New York, Chicago, Kansas City, Minnesota. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Trade Commission, Census, Congressional Budget Office, AHRQ, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. These are great jobs. These are ones where there's really smart people that you're working with. You get to do very meaningful, important policy work. They will not necessarily value econ journal publications very much. Like they'll be happy to see you do it, but it may or may not be something that they give you a huge amount of time to do during the work week. The Federal Reserve is an exception to that. Like if you work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, they will give you a lot of your own time to do your own research. The Board of Governors less so because they have a lot of demands on their time to serve the board. Non-governmental organizations like the IMF, World Bank, and OECD can be fantastic. There's amazing work being done in these organizations by great people. You should definitely consider contract research organizations. So there's RAND, Mathematica Policy Research, the Urban Institute, APT. So for example, Mathematica gets grants, they get hired contracts by the federal government to conduct randomized experiments. I'll just make up one. Like suppose like, Missouri wants to evaluate its Medicaid program. They might hire Mathematica to conduct randomized experiments, and you would get access to data and methods that would be very difficult for you to put together on your own as an assistant professor. And the people who tend to go to these places do tend to be very happy, right? They're doing really important work. Consulting, this is more kind of spending down your human capital than building it up. But you get well compensated to spend down your human capital in a way. People I've seen on the market with very open preferences have been very pleasantly surprised by the salaries and signing bonuses they're offered in consulting. Industry, there's been an increasing demand for economists in industry: Google, Twitter, eBay, Amazon. And the one thing you should really keep in mind is there are really good people everywhere. So you should never be arrogant or snobby to your interviewers, thinking that because they're at a non-academic institution, they must not have been very good. I mean, there are really tremendously accomplished people you could learn from, be very happy with in all these different sectors. So really, like, sort of think about all these options. Don't dismiss anything out of hand. Let's just check and see if there's any questions on this. Okay, question about, are public policy, public health jobs advertised on Joe? So for the most part, yes. So the econ market is very easy to understand. So anybody who's used to hiring PhD economists will know to advertise on Joe. There's some small percentage that might only advertise in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, but that would be a place that historically hasn't hired economists and doesn't know how our market works. So don't drive yourself crazy sort of searching every dark corner of the web for a potential ad that's not on Joe. Joe can really be your number one source. Another electronic clearinghouse besides the Joe network is econjobmarket.org. That's another place there will be advertisements and jobs you will apply for. Advice for people with spouses. Yep, so that's great. I've been on the market with my spouse repeatedly, and reasonable people have different opinions about this. The C-SWEP newsletter from the AEA had a series of people writing essays about offering advice on how to handle a dual job market search. So again, reasonable people disagree. My opinion is just get it out there immediately. If it's not a match for whatever reason, let's not waste time. And so I actually put it in my cover letters. Like when I applied for jobs, I just said, look, I have a spouse. She's an academic. We're only applying places that work for both of us. So the fact that I'm applying to you means my spouse has a good sort of option right nearby. And then during the interview, I'm happy to talk about that. But you may not want to do that. And it's perfectly okay to not reveal it in your cover letter, to not mention it in the interview even. But at some point you want to mention it because universities in particular have the ability to create jobs for a partner, but you have to tell them in time. So if you waited until you got the job offer and then said, oh, by the way, I have a spouse who needs a job, you've really waited too long, because it takes time for them to put these things together, and they're going to be frustrated that you didn't give them a heads up earlier. Should we try to have papers sent to journals and strengthen our CV? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all during graduate school, people should try and be ambitious about publishing. But just don't lose track of the fact, the number one thing that matters is your job market paper. And so do not take away time from improving your job market paper to try and strengthen some other paper that's going out to a journal. If you could have a publication, forthcoming paper, or even an R&R from a good journal, that's a great signal. But your job market paper is the thing they're going to read, they're going to see you present, and that's what matters most. Okay, lots of questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to head back to the presentation. We can catch up more at the end. Okay, so one other thing that the AEA has done is it's aware that with COVID and the cancellation of the in-person AEA conference, that there's a risk of the market for economists unraveling. And what I mean by that is everybody not knowing when different stages are supposed to happen, and so people starting to move really early. And that's bad, because as economists, we want to have thick markets, lots of people on both sides of the market, labor demand, labor supply at the same time. So what the AEA has announced in an email to all members is a suggested timeline for how the market should proceed this year. And the first suggestion is that employers not send interview invitations to you until December 7th. So the rationale for that is that there is something called the AEA signaling process. So you as a job candidate, and I'll describe this more in just a little bit, but you as a job candidate can register with the AEA and then send 2 signals of special interest to employers that you choose. And we want employers to receive that information and consider it before issuing interview invitations. So we're asking them to wait until after they get the signals on December 2nd, think about what they've received, and then issue invitations on December 7th. Secondly, the AEA is recommending that all employers wait until January 6th to start the initial interviews. These initial interviews are almost always going to be online, either on Zoom or on the phone. And in theory, they could happen earlier, but we don't want them to happen during the AEA meeting because we want people to be able to participate in that. In the past, the job market took place then simply because everybody's in the same city, but now that it's virtual, there's no need to sort of prevent job candidates and interviewers from attending the AEA and participating. So after the AEA ends, that's when we recommend that people begin interviewing, January 6th. We also recommend that all employers use eContrack to list when they sent invitations for interviews, when they sent invitations for flyouts, and when they close their search. So your schedule on the job market may look something like this. September to November and December too, you're going to be applying for jobs. You're going to register late in November which 2 jobs you want to signal as indicating that you are really interested. On December 2nd, those signals will be given to employers. Then employers will start scheduling interviews with you. Now, if you're interested in the European job market, which is relatively new, this is only the 3rd year of it, you can, that's a market where the initial interviews take place in December. So you can register at this link I've provided. If you yourself are European, you should definitely consider participating in this market. If you are non-European but would genuinely be interested in working there, again, you should really consider participating in that market. That might be another way too, if you're genuinely interested in working in Europe, to address like the drop in demand due to COVID. Then in January, the initial interviews will start for the US market. And then from there on out, there's really no synchronization, right? Employers just go at their own speed of deciding when do we have flyouts, when do we make offers, and so on. So then in March, the last step of this is there's something called the scramble, which is where people still available on both sides sign up, and then there's a website where you can see who's still unmatched on the other side. So right, if you are still looking for a job in April, for example, you may not know which jobs are already filled. But through the scramble, you can see which jobs are still available. That's the purpose of the scramble. But I would say, because we're not having an in-person AEA meeting, you should be prepared for greater variation in this timing, in this schedule, than usual. There may well be people who try and interview you in December, maybe even November, who knows. That may be more likely this year, although the AEA is asking people to stick to this timeline. So what can you do now, right? You've got several months before all that all starts. How can you use this time? One thing you should definitely do is get your job candidate website in great condition. So what I mean by that is you should have a website that's easily Googleable, like findable, attached to your university or department's job market candidate webpage, and where you list your CV. And please, please, please just have your CV directly available for download and viewing. Do not make me go to Google Docs or some other gated website. Everybody who's been on search committees can say that they have tried to read people's CVs, and because it's gated or because it's on Google Docs and they're not signed into Google, they can't read the person's CV. At some point, people just give up, right? So try and make it easy for people. Don't make people jump through hoops. Don't assume that people are logged into certain websites or services to be able to read your CV. Another thing you can do is just Google yourself and check your online presence. Like I've done stuff like interviewing people for college, and they will tell me like, oh, here's my email address to contact me to schedule it. And the email address is leathergirl@gmail.com. I didn't need to know you're leather girl. You know what I mean? Like, likewise, there's people who've written to me and said, hey, I'm a student. Can I work for you as an RA? And then when I Google them to try and find like their resume and see what they're up to, you get pictures of them like drunk on spring break. Like clean up your internet presence. delete pictures you don't want people to see, get rid of goofy personal stuff on your student webpage, and just make sure it's professional. If you want examples, go to the NBER job candidates webpage, and then you can go to like all the PhD granting departments and just see how other people do it. I would say another thing that you can do right now is get the professional clothes you're going to need, right? We know that in graduate school, you can get away with wearing jeans, shorts, and t-shirts like for years. There is a different standard on the job market. Like, and do not go by what you see among seminar attendees, right? Or seminar participants, right? In your universities, you've seen people show up from outside the university to give a seminar dressed like slobs, right? When you're a full professor with a great reputation, you can dress like a slob too. But right now, as a younger person on the job market, you should look professional, right? So get a suit, get at least two things that are completely unquestioningly professional. No one would raise an eyebrow at. If you have an old laptop, now's the time to upgrade. Make sure you have a good, reliable one. If you have an old mobile phone, now's the time to take care of that and get it new. You do not want to be in December trying to schedule interviews and have your phone repeatedly dying. You do not want to be, trying to give job talks and having your computer constantly failing. Like, get those things taken care of now. Another thing, right, in this new Zoom-heavy world, make sure you have a fast, reliable internet connection, and make sure you have a private, quiet room where you can do these interviews and give seminars. So just to give you another sense of the timing, here are the percent of Joe ads in a given year that appeared in a certain month. So this is for 2017 to 19. So you can see the big year for Joe ads is October. The second biggest is September, and then November. So right now, like July, like the past few months is really the quiet time every year. August, September, October, November, to some extent December, that's when you're really going to see a lot of ads showing up. So ads are posted on Joe continuously, but just try not to drive yourself crazy constantly checking it. So let me just check the Q&A, see if there's some things to ask right now. So one question is, how important is the job market paper to industry jobs? So I think it's the case that all of us are most familiar with how things work in academia because we've seen it. Like, even as a graduate student, you see people show up, you see them give a job talk and how they're treated, questioned, and so on. They're there to have meetings. There are some differences. So typically, the places that hire PhD economists know how our market works. They've already got PhD economists. They know what you're doing other places, and they will ask you to do something pretty similar. They will want you to come have one-on-one meetings. They will want to have you present your job market paper, but it might be shorter. But they also might have other things they want you to do. So for example, like at the OECD Young Professionals Program, people are actually asked to take a written test. They're actually tested on like economics knowledge and intuition and things like that. If you're applying to industry, they might in the interview give you a case and say like, okay, let's give you a vignette. Let's give you sort of a scenario. You walk us through how you would solve this business problem. So in other words, any place that's not academia, they want to see that you're meeting the standards of a PhD economist, but they also want to see, do you also have the skills that we need at our place? You can think of it the same way at liberal arts colleges, right? Like, they want to see your research is good, but we also want to make sure you're a really good teacher, dedicated advisor, and so on. Is it necessarily disadvantageous if your job market paper is co-authored? So here's where it would be a problem, is if you are co-authoring it with your advisor is very senior and famous, the paper is directly in your advisor's area of work, then the assumption is going to be this was the senior advisor's idea and you were just the RA, but the advisor made you a co-author. That would be bad. If it's co-authored with a junior faculty member, if it's co-authored with another grad student, that can be perfectly fine, but you should be prepared to explain what you brought to the table. Like, did you do the empirical work? Was it your idea? Did you do the theory? And people might like push you a little more to make sure that you know everything in the paper and are not just doing half of it. Excuse me. Is it harder for Americans who receive their PhD from a non-US institution to find jobs in the US? I think not particularly, like conditional on the same quality of job market paper and presentation. Where it's tricky is if Americans haven't heard of the institution where you got the degree, and so then they don't know how good is this place. And there still is like market imperfections with respect to Europe. in the US. Like, there are really good people produced in Europe, and the American educational system isn't properly able to evaluate those candidates. So you may need more of your advisors who have like contacts in the US reaching out and explaining how good you are, or getting information about like, no, my PhD is coming from, you know, the top ranked PhD institution in this country. People need help for that. Should we wear a suit for Zoom interviews? From the waist up, I would say like make sure you look professional. Absolutely. Is it advantageous if your job market paper is accepted to a health econ journal? Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I mean, most people go on the market with 0 publications. And so if you have one in a credible journal, that definitely helps you. Okay, I'm going to switch back. We'll go to more questions later. Okay, so what does it mean to apply for a job? So the packet that gets transmitted through the Joe Network or through econjobmarket.org consists of a cover letter. And for some people, the cover letter is just like, hey, please consider me for that job. For other people, they go into detail as to why they're a good match for the position. Now, you're going to be applying to over 100 jobs potentially, so you can't tailor the cover letter for every job. But for the jobs you really care about and that are a really good match for you, you can and absolutely should, in that cover letter, explain why it's a good match. And don't assume that they know that. Don't assume that they've scrutinized your CV to see why it's a great match. You need to say, you know, I am really excited to teach at your institution because, you know, I myself went to a liberal arts college, and you have faculty X, Y, and Z who also work in applied micro, which is my field. And, you know, just make it really easy for them to see why you're a great match. Your job market paper gets sent, so make sure that's in great shape. Do not have typos in the abstract, for example. Recommendation letters get sent, so give your faculty advisors time to write those. You could also send other papers than your job market paper, but do not do this unless they are strong. Like, send any publications you have in econ journals. But if you're thinking of like, hey, I wrote that paper for a second-year course, maybe I'll send that too. If it's only second-year quality, do not send it. That would not help. Some organizations will also ask you to write a teaching statement, like explaining your teaching experience and your teaching philosophy, a research statement to explain your big picture and your future, and a diversity statement where you explain how you personally would improve diversity at that institution, but also, even if you don't bring any diversity, how you are aware of their mission of diversity and inclusion and will help them to fulfill it. Like, in other words, how you would make sure that you would encourage underrepresented minorities in economics at their institution. So I've already mentioned the clearinghouses. You might wonder, well, okay, so employers are getting hundreds of these applications. How do they decide to interview? Who to interview? So one kind of interesting source, so Sebastian Telotrio did this internet survey via Twitter. Now, it wasn't like a, you know, nationally representative sample of any kind. It was just an opportunistic sample. But I think there's a little bit of information here, and it kind of confirms my impressions. So he asked people, rank the following items in terms of their importance for selecting candidates to interview at the AEA meeting. So one is most important. So job market paper was number 1, letters of recommendation was second, and then everything else is kind of below that. So here's the histogram of responses, upper left. So over in the upper left, you can see over 60% of respondents said that the job market paper was the number 1 consideration. And then letters of recommendation, which is the top row on the right. So about 25% said letters of recommendation are number 1, and about 20% said letters of recommendation are number 2. So those are the 2 most important things, I think. I've already mentioned the signals. Make sure to take advantage of this. Virtually everybody does this. Last year, December 2019, over 1,750 people signed up and sent signals to 648 unique employers. And just one little thing I want to point out is the fact that 648 different employers got signals is again a reminder that not everybody's best match is the same. Like, everybody's got their own best match. Lots of people are looking at different ads in Joe and thinking, my gosh, that's the perfect thing. That would be really great for me. So again, you're not in direct competition really with any other one individual on the market. So you might wonder, well, does sending these signals actually help me get an interview? And the evidence suggests yes. So as part of an earlier AEA committee on the job market that I was part of, we wrote this paper that was published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And what we asked is, we asked some people, if you could have sent a third signal, where would you have sent it? And then for people who didn't participate, we said, if you had participated, who would you have signaled? And so using those counterfactuals, what we found is that actually signaling somebody raises the probability of an interview by about 6.8 percentage points. So a big increase. And anecdotally, it seems like signaling is most helpful for institutions that would be skeptical that you might be interested in them. So for example, liberal arts college might think you're just trying to use this as a backup. Your number one choice is a research university. Or a university in Australia might think, well, people want to get a fly out to Australia to enjoy the weather, but would they really be willing to leave the US and come here to work? These signals are a way for you to overcome that. And they're credible because you only get to send two. They're sent through the AEA, so you can't send any more than two, and their very scarcity makes them credible. So where should you send them? The short answer is, of course, where they do the most good. They move you off the interview list to on it for a job you value highly, but that's really hard for you to know. So here's a couple things to consider. It should be a job you see as a great match. So if you do get the interview, that there's a big upside for you. When you signal, they provide you some space for comments. So fill that out. Like use that space to explain, here's why I'm signaling you. Here's why it's such a good match. You should probably prioritize signaling places that you don't have other ways to credibly signal interest. So for example, if your advisor says, oh, my best friend works at that place, I'll just call them and tell them you're really interested, you may not need to signal that place because your advisor is very credibly demonstrating interest for you. And then again, think about these places that might be interested in you but skeptical of your interest, like a place in like a small town employer who might think like, well, you're really willing to leave San Francisco to come work here. That signal might overcome that concern. Now, one kind of bummer about the job market is that nobody ever tells you when you're not moving forward in the search. So you might apply to a job, they will never tell you that they're not interviewing you. If they interview you, they will never tell you we're not flying you out. If they fly you out, they will often not tell you you're not getting an offer. You will just get ghosted, right? They will stop calling you, or you will just never hear from them. So that's why the AEA sponsors this page called Econ Track. The link is there on the slide. And that's where we ask employers to log on and indicate when they've made interview invitations, fly-out invitations, and when they've made their offers and when they've closed their search. And so that way, at least you can check there and see like, okay, well, I guess MIT's not calling me because they sent out their invitations for interviews 2 weeks ago. So you should expect, initial interviews typically took place at the ASSA meetings during the conference, but there is no in-person conference. So you should just expect everything to be by Skype and Zoom. Take these incredibly seriously. These are so important. Your placement committee, your advisors at your institution should do mock interviews where you play act and they play act. They play act the employer, you play act the job candidate. There are tons of questions that are routinely asked. This is a test where you can know most of the questions in advance. So I write a guide to the econ job market. Like that job guide lists all sorts of questions you should expect to get. Practice those a lot. Like practice them with other job candidates, with your friends, practice answering them to your advisors in the placement committee. You should have really good answers to all those questions because other people will. Other people will have practiced a lot and will be very professional and smooth, and you do not want to be disadvantaged. You can also ask when they contact you and say, hey, we'd like to interview you, you can ask them who will be at the interview. And that's a huge advantage to know that because you can Google them in advance and you can see like, oh, like these two health economists are going to be in the room. I want to talk about how much I want to work with them and how my work relates to their work. On the other hand, maybe they contact you for an interview and there's no health economists in the room. That also really shapes how you describe your work. If nobody else is in your field, you need to describe it in more general terms, and you need to describe it in a way that's appealing to people outside the field. So ask that question and then tailor your remarks based on who's going to actually be there. Also, don't just be reactive. And by reactive, I mean don't just be primed to answer well. Be ready to ask them questions that you might have because you should be going into this thinking, having thought about how good a match it is, and then realizing what information you're lacking. And so go into it with questions for them. It's okay to write them down and pull out your sheet of written questions at the end of the interview. That's totally legit. And I think it's a good thing to do because you're going to be so hyped up on adrenaline and forgetful. It's helpful to have that written down. You can't have written down answers to questions they might ask you, but you can have written down questions to ask them. So some things you should not ask them. Do not ask about salary. Do not ask about chances you'll get tenure. It's kind of simplistic to ask anything you could easily find online. like for you to come into an interview with us and say, so how many faculty do you have in your department? Well, like you could have Googled that. You're revealing that you're not that interested and you didn't do your homework. But what you can ask is about stuff that's not online, but that really matters to you. Like, what are the students like? Where have your PhD students placed lately? Um, you know, do you think the undergrads would be interested in me teaching an upper level health economics course? Like, there's all sorts of things you can ask that signal like what you care about and what you see as important in a match. Now, one thing that people I think are always worried about to some extent, and women more than men, I would say, is what if an interviewer asks you something inappropriate? And so inappropriate means, are you married? Or even skipping the marriage question, saying, so what does your wife do, right? Presuming you have one. Ask you how old you are. Do you have any plans to have kids? I've heard economists say like, oh, those questions are illegal. They're not. Like you can look this up on the EEOC website. It's not illegal to ask questions like this, but if there is a later lawsuit alleging discrimination on this dimension, having asked it at the time is kind of seen as evidence of intention to discriminate. So every human resources department would tell an interviewer, do not ask these questions, but they're not strictly illegal. So my advice is that if somebody asks you a question like that makes you uncomfortable and you feel like they're trying to probe and get information you don't want to reveal, one response is to say, well, I assume you're asking because you're wondering whether I can take the job and you're wondering whether I can give it my full commitment. I assure you that I can. So then you've addressed a bigger issue and you've made it clear I'm not answering that specific question. But if somebody does harass you or discriminate against you, the AEA now has an ombudsperson, a lawyer, whose job is to handle these issues. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see the link and you can see their email. So you should email that person if you've been mistreated on the job market. So what are employers looking for? They're looking for somebody who's going to succeed in research. So somebody who's smart, who has ideas of their own. They didn't just write a job market paper that their advisor told them to do and has no ideas for the future. They're ambitious, they're energetic, and ideally has papers already published or forthcoming, but most people don't. Somebody who's going to communicate well, teach well, advise students well. There's no possibility they'd ever discriminate against students or harass them. And somebody who's going to be nice to be around. Like they're looking for somebody who might be in the office next door for 30 years. And that's not an exaggeration. So they want somebody who's reasonable, somebody who's open to collaborating, and somebody who's willing to produce public goods, right? So somebody who's willing to do committee work, willing to do administration, and won't just like kind of lock their office door and work on their own stuff and make everybody else do the hard work of the department. So the second round of the job market is when you would go on flyouts. So that's now an anachronistic term because nobody's going to be flying anywhere probably. But you can still think of that being the second stage. And in that second stage, this consists of one-on-one meetings with individual faculty or potentially small groups, you giving a job talk, a research seminar that could be 60 to 90 minutes. And historically, you'd have dinner with faculty. I really do think you won't be traveling this year in January through March to do this. It'll probably all be online, so there won't be a dinner. The research seminar, I'm sure, will still happen, so make sure that you're able to give a good Zoom seminar. The one-on-one meetings, I'm sure, will still happen, but they might not happen all on the same day, right? So they might say to you, we're just going to schedule faculty to meet with you throughout the week because faculty all have different sort of teaching schedules and commitments, so it might be more spread out. The job talk is incredibly important. A high quality job market paper and a high quality job talk are the most valuable assets you can have on the job market. So just like you're going to practice your interview skills and answering interview questions, you need to practice your job talk so many times you could do it in your sleep because people will challenge you. There will be technological problems. Excuse me. There will be ways that you could get thrown off your game, and you want to have practiced it so much that you're just unflappable. And again, you can do it almost from memorization. Especially if you are applying to jobs in interdisciplinary departments or employers, you need to win over the people who are not health economists, right? So, well, even in the econ department, right? The median voter will not be a health economist, so you need to appeal to people outside of health economics, and you need to be their favorite candidate, right, as an outsider. So that means you really need to think about how do I explain what I'm doing in my job market in a way that every economist would think it's interesting, so that every social scientist or health researcher would think it's interesting? And that's not something you've been doing lately. Like lately, you've been going really narrow, trying to impress your advisors with your methods and your theory. That's the opposite. You've won over the insiders. Now you need to win over the outsiders to get the job. So really think about how to explain it in clear terms. How do you make clear tables, clear figures? How do you explain the intuition of what you're doing to outsiders? That's really crucial in winning over that median voter and getting voted the job. You should be really comfortable with being interrupted with questions. However, do not let other people interrupt you. You can indicate that people need to wait until you finish your thought. It doesn't look good if you keep interrupting yourself to field questions, because then people feel like they're taken out of the flow. You can run into people who are difficult. Like, as we know, there are some economists who are on the spectrum, or who are just, very type A, or who, are egomaniacal and want to make sure everybody knows they're smart. And so they're going to interrupt with aggressive questions. Practice responding to aggressive questioners. Don't be harsh on them immediately. But if somebody's showing that they're determined to disrupt your seminar, then you need to take control. You need to say, I'm sorry, but this sounds like something that cannot be addressed within the scope of the seminar. You and I can talk about it separately, but I'm going to move on. And I guarantee you, if you say something like that, by that time, probably everybody's grateful you've shut this person down, and they're going to think like, wow, you can handle yourself. So don't worry about insulting them if it's clear that they're really just trying to be difficult. But don't do that too quickly if somebody's just asking an innocent question, obviously. I mentioned the scramble that's available in late March. It's a pretty thick market. In March of 2020, there were 691 job candidates participating, with 76 employers who had 86 jobs. So obviously it's not an even participation on both sides, but the job candidates there includes people who are not rookies, people who already have jobs and are just kind of keeping an eye on what's available if they want to make a lateral move. This is kind of a nice table that was put together by, again, Brooke Helpy McFall. It's based on her survey of job market candidates from 2007, 2010. And so this is the part that I think is interesting, is this lower panel. And so what it says is the proportion of applications that resulted in an interview was 0.194. So in other words, for every 100 applications that people put out, they got 19.4 interviews. For every interview people got, there was a 36.6 probability of getting a flyout. For every flyout people got, there was a 57.3 chance of getting an offer. So obviously, if you applied wildly to things that aren't a good match, you're not going to have a 19.4% of getting an interview from these applications to places that are a bad match. This is all conditional on people originally thinking these were jobs that made sense for them. But this just gives you a sort of sense of guidance, right? As to, on average, the number of interviews that result from a given number of applications. So it's going to be great when you're out the other side of this and the job offers are starting to come in. It's very exciting. Always make sure, always make sure to get the job offer in writing. So I saw one of our students here at Cornell who was told orally, yep, you've got the offer. This person pulled out of other searches and just waited. And then they kept stringing them along. And in the end, they never gave them a written offer. And this person had pulled off the market because of what they told them. So always get it in writing. It can be an Adobe PDF that they email to you that has a signature on it, but get a signed written offer. That offer will include salary, summer support potentially, which means most people who are hired for academic jobs, suppose they say your salary is $100,000 to be an assistant professor. Usually that $100,000 applies to a 9-month period, and you can write grants to fill in the 3 months in the summer. So you get paid the same amount every 2 weeks, but you can write grants and pay yourself more, actually. And so some places, when they hire you, actually chip in and give you some of that extra summer support. So your salary will actually be higher initially because of that. Offers in academia sometimes include a course reduction for the first year or two, moving expenses, computer budget, all that sort of thing. Departments and employers will typically give you a week, let's say, to consider the offer, but it could be a lot less. There's places that feel like we are not going to let you string us along and say no, and then we lose not only you, but our second and third and fourth choices as well. So some places might say, we'll give you till Monday, we'll give you over the weekend. Often, but not always, it's possible to get an extension. When you get your first offer, tell everybody else you've had a fly out to that you have an offer, because that may allow them to then hasten their vote or hasten their decision making. a given employer will probably only improve their offer if the competing offer you show them is from a similar institution, right? So for example, like suppose you're have offers at Penn State and Cornerstone Research, and you tell Penn State, oh well, Cornerstone Research is going to pay me 30,000 more. Well, that's just such a completely different job. Like Penn State doesn't feel obligated to match that, right? It's not an academic offer. They're not going to match that, and so you would expect that places will respond really to competing offers from the same sector from similar or better institutions. You should really bend over backwards to be nice during negotiation. Sometimes people get awkward or they get really aggressive and rude. Places have long memories. So if you get really arrogant with an institution and very demanding and you're shouting at the department chair that you want more money, they're going to remember that and they're going to talk. So always make sure to be super nice, super thankful, and very friendly and positive in all of your negotiating interactions. So here's some information. It's based on a survey of chairs of U.S. economics departments. And it says that last year, so people who got jobs last May who are starting those jobs this fall, the average salary of PhD economists hired by PhD granting institutions was over $135,000. The teaching load was 3.1, and again, that's in PhD institutions. If you look to the bottom, BA institutions, that's more the liberal arts colleges. The average salary there was $96,311, teaching an average of roughly 5 classes per year. So there is a salary difference between a PhD granting university and a liberal arts college, and there's also a difference in teaching load. This is data from that survey of job candidates 2007 to 2010, just where did people end up? 62% became assistant professors at a university, 8% became assistant professors at a 4-year college, 19% worked for government nonprofits or quasi-governmental organizations, 7% went to business and industry, and 5% became postdocs. So again, everybody's looking for their own best match. There's lots of different places people are going, so don't think of any other job candidate as a direct competitor. So again, like in general, I know this is going to be a rough year because of COVID, but in general, like you as a PhD economist are in a much better situation than PhDs in English, PhDs in history, math. The vast majority of economists find a job that they like. Unemployment is extremely low among PhD economists. So the National Science Foundation in 2010, which remember is at the end of the financial crisis, the unemployment rate for PhD economists was 0.9% at a time when the national unemployment rate was 9.6%. So people overwhelmingly like have jobs. Very few people just don't have a job. And also, when you look back at these surveys of job candidates, the vast majority of people say that they are very or extremely satisfied with the job they get. So, okay, just to sum up, like the 4 most important pieces of advice. The first is know where you fit in the profession, like know what subfield of health economics you're going to be focused on. Know your next 3 papers, your comparative advantages as a researcher or a teacher. Do you want to write grants and be in a soft money department, or do you want to teach, be in a liberal arts college, and so on? Keep in mind that success is finding a good match. Forget about what impresses your parents. Don't worry about what your advisor wants. What matters is you. What kind of job will you be happy in, and what kind of job will you continue to grow and improve in? You have to be honest with your advisors and potential employers about what's a good match for you. And the final thing is just keep in mind that the job market is just the first period in a repeat game. You are going to be interacting with the interviewers you meet, the other job candidates you're quote unquote competing against. You're going to interact with them throughout your career for the next 40 years or more. So there's huge benefits to carrying yourself, with maturity and integrity and developing a good reputation based on this market experience. I mean, what I've seen really from being placement director here twice, from having my own students in the market for a long time, is people are very worried about the market, but they use that adrenaline to work hard, to practice. And when they come out the other side, they very often say, that was great. I met so many interesting people, and that was went a lot better than I expected. Okay, let me go up to Q&A. We're a little over time, but we're going to answer some questions here. Can one negotiate working remote during COVID-19? I'm certain for industry, they might force you to do that. Government might also require you to do that. Universities have typically let it be up to faculty whether they want to teach in person or teach online. So I think the short answer is yes. Is it a disadvantage to have a job market paper that's already reviewed and revised and resubmit? No, that's great because it shows it's getting through peer review. That's a wonderful thing. As a postdoc, would you recommend? Oh, okay. If you're a postdoc, what's different? I think what you want to do is explain how your work is different and improved from doing the postdoc. Like if you came out and your job market paper after the postdoc was the same one you used entering the postdoc, then I think a natural question will be, well, what did you accomplish during that time? So have a good story about the human capital you've acquired, the research you've accomplished during the postdoc. Can you ask what's valued for tenure? I mean, I guess you could, but the thing is that it's pretty much the same everywhere, which is do great research, and teach well and do good service. So I'm not sure that they would have a lot to share with you that would surprise you. Okay, when I was on the job market, what's one thing you wish I'd known at the time or something that surprised me? I think it's hard to imagine in advance the randomness that can happen. So for example, like I had a colleague who was doing the interviewing, like he was a faculty member interviewing someone in a hotel room at AEA, and he got like violently ill and ran to the bathroom, dropped to his knees and vomited into the toilet. And the poor person in the other room still trying to do their interview with the other faculty. Like who could have thought of that? Like who could have thought that would happen? So like crazy stuff can happen. And you just have to kind of be unflappable and let it go on. It's also really hard for you to know whether an interview goes well or not. So as an example, like there's times that we've interviewed people and it's apparent 5 seconds in, not 5 seconds, it's apparent 1 minute in that this person's not a great match for us. Like they're just, not able to explain their research, for example. And so then we're just quiet and we're nodding. We're just trying to let the half hour go as quickly as possible. That person might come out of that interview thinking like, I aced that. Like they didn't have really any questions for me. On the other hand, there's people, we love their research and we want to know about every little detail. And so everybody in the room grills them relentlessly for half an hour. That person might come out feeling like they've just been through the ringer, but that's because it went really well. On the other hand, some people, when they don't like your research, they grill you then. So it's just really hard for you to know how well it's going. And so it's really important when you leave the interview that you just have some like mental way of leaving that past interview behind you and going into the next interview like as calm and relaxed and as optimistic and energetic as you were at the beginning of the day. I do not know if Europe has signals. It'd be cool if they did. Can you use a published work as your job market paper? I guess so, but I think people might feel a little bit like, well, but what's the point of me giving you feedback? But if it's impressively published and it's pretty recent, yeah. I mean, if it was published from like 3 years ago, then I think people would feel like, well, we still don't know what your current research is. But in general, like that could work. How strong of a signal is an R&R compared to a publication? I would say, I mean, it's noteworthy, but it's not certain. So certainly the publication counts more than just an R&R. But I think it wouldn't surprise me if like half of R&Rs or more get converted into publications. So yeah, you could say like, okay, it's worth half a publication maybe. Let's see. Okay, we've run over time, so I don't want to hold people any longer. Thank you very much for participating. It's been great to interact with you on this. Feel free to drop me questions if you have them. Our AEA Committee on the Job Market has a webpage where we post communications. Keep an eye on that. And the AEA will also be having a webinar on September 2nd, I believe, and you're welcome to attend that as well to talk about the job market. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day and really good luck with the job market.